The Meridian station hung in the void like a steel flower, its cylindrical petals rotating slowly against the backdrop of a dead moon. Commander Ravencross pressed his palm against the viewport of the approaching shuttle, watching the neutral diplomatic platform grow larger. 3 years of negotiations had led to this moment, the first face-to-face meeting between humans and Valari in over 2 centuries. "Sir, we're receiving final clearance for docking," reported Lieutenant Torres. From the pilot's seat, behind Raven, the small diplomatic team shuffled through their briefing materials one last time. Ambassador Hendricks, the mission's official leader, looked pale despite his brave words about historic opportunities. Raven's hand instinctively moved to the plasma pistol at his hip. The weapon felt heavy, a reminder of the countless human colonies that had been reduced to ash by Valari warships. His own grandfather had died in the siege of New Geneva, cut down by alien energy weapons while defending civilian evacuation ships. The hatred ran deep in his blood. "Remember," Hendricks said quietly, "we're here to establish preliminary contact protocols. Nothing more. These creatures may look humanoid, but never forget what they've done to our people." The shuttle's docking clamps engaged with a metallic shutter. Through the airlock, Raven could see the pristine corridors of the station, all white walls and soft lighting designed to appear non-threatening. Somewhere in this sterile environment, the enemy was waiting. They moved through the station's corridors in formation, their footsteps echoing off the polished floors. The central meeting chamber was a circular room with a transparent dome ceiling, offering a view of the stars beyond. A curved table sat in the center, with chairs arranged on both sides. The human delegation took their positions, and Raven moved to stand behind the ambassador's chair, his eyes scanning the room's entrances. Then they arrived. The Valari delegation entered through the opposite doorway, and Raven's breath caught in his throat. He had seen images from long-range reconnaissance, but nothing had prepared him for seeing them in person. They moved with predatory grace, their purple-tinted skin seeming to absorb and reflect the chamber's light. Each wore form-fitting armor that accentuated rather than concealed their distinctly feminine forms. At their head walked a figure that commanded immediate attention. Taller than the others, with intricate silver markings traced across her exposed arms and neck, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had never known defeat. Her hair was silver white, pulled back in a complex braid that revealed the elegant lines of her face. When she turned to survey the room, Raven saw eyes like molten gold, burning with intelligence and barely contained power. War Captain Velora, Nightbane. Even across the gulf of species and language, her reputation preceded her. The scourge of the Outer Rim, the ghost of 1,000 battles. She had personally commanded the fleets that had reduced 6 human colonies to radioactive debris. "I am Ambassador Hendricks of the Terran Federation," the human diplomat began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "We come in the spirit of potential peace, hoping to find common ground between our peoples." Velora stepped forward, her movement fluid and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried the musical quality of her language, but the translation device rendered her words in crisp, unaccented English. "I am War Captain Velora Nightbane of the Valari Empire. I speak for the Crimson Throne and the honor of our ancestors. We come because our leaders demand it, not because we believe your species capable of true honor." The insult hung in the air like a blade. Raven felt his jaw clench, his hand moving unconsciously toward his weapon. Around the table, the tension was palpable, both delegations eyeing each other with barely concealed hostility. But then Velora's golden eyes met his across the room, and something impossible happened. The world seemed to shift around them. For a moment that stretched into eternity, there was no one else in the chamber. No delegations, no centuries of hatred, no war between their peoples. There was only the woman across from him, and the sudden, overwhelming sense that he had been searching for her his entire life without knowing it. Images flashed through his mind, not memories, but something deeper. Flying through purple skies, his hand intertwined with another's. The feeling of completeness, of two souls that had found their other half. Love so pure and powerful, it made his chest ache with longing. Velora's eyes widened, her carefully controlled expression cracking for just an instant. Her hand moved to her throat, as if she couldn't breathe. Around them, the diplomatic proceedings continued, but neither could focus on the words being spoken. Preliminary trade agreements, Hendricks was saying, but his voice sounded distant, muffled. Raven tried to force himself to listen, to focus on his duty, but his eyes kept being drawn back to the Valari. War-Captain Dot. She was staring at him with an expression of confusion and something that might have been fear. Her perfectly composed mask had slipped, revealing vulnerability beneath the warrior's exterior. When their eyes met again, she looked away quickly, but not before he saw the questions burning in her golden gaze. The meeting continued for another hour, but neither Raven nor Velora contributed to the discussion. They stood at their respective posts, hyper-aware of each other's presence, while trying to process what had happened. When the session finally concluded with an agreement to meet again in 2 days, both delegations departed with cold formality. But as Raven walked toward the human quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that his entire world had just been turned upside down. The enemy he had been trained to hate, the alien warrior responsible for so much human suffering, had somehow reached into his soul with a single glance. Dot in her own quarters across the station. Velora stood before a mirror, staring at her reflection as if seeing a stranger. Her hands were shaking, something that hadn't happened since her first battle as a young warrior. The human's face was burned into her memory. Strong jaw, dark hair, eyes the color of Earth's ancient seas. She had felt something in that moment of contact, something that defied everything she had been taught about humans and their primitive emotions. It was as if she had been sleeping her entire life, only to suddenly wake up in the presence of this enemy soldier. Both knew that whatever had happened in that chamber, their lives would never be the same. The carefully constructed hatred of centuries had cracked, and through that crack, something ancient and powerful had begun to stir. The first contact between their species had succeeded, beyond anyone's expectations, but not in the way their governments had planned. Raven's eyes snapped open in the darkness of his quarters, his heart pounding as the dream faded. But it hadn't been a dream. It had been too vivid, too real. He could still feel the alien wind against his skin, still remember the sensation of flying through purple skies with someone beside him. Someone with hands that weren't quite human, skin that shimmered with an otherworldly beauty. He sat up on the narrow bed, running his hands through his hair. The digital clock showed 0347 hours. The third night in a row he'd awakened like this. Each dream was more intense than the last, more detailed. In them, he wasn't Raven Cross, but someone else entirely. Someone who spoke a language he didn't recognize, but understood perfectly. Someone who loved without reservation. Across the station, Velora paced her quarters like a caged predator. Sleep had become impossible since that first meeting. When she closed her eyes, she saw visions of battles fought alongside a human warrior, not against humans, but beside one. She saw herself younger, wearing different armor, fighting creatures that existed in no historical record she knew. But it was the emotions that disturbed her most. In these visions, she felt complete contentment, a happiness so profound it made her current existence seem hollow by comparison. She felt love, not the duty-bound affection she'd known in her previous relationships, but something that consumed her entire being. The memory of the human commander's eyes haunted her. Those deep blue eyes that had looked at her with such intensity, such recognition, as if he knew her. Unable to stand the confines of her room any longer, Velora made a decision that would have shocked her superiors. She disabled the location tracker in her armor and slipped out of the Valari quarters. The station was quiet in the artificial night cycle, its corridors dimly lit by emergency lighting. She found herself drawn to the observation deck, a transparent dome that offered a panoramic view of space. As she approached, she saw a figure already there, silhouetted against the stars. Even from behind, she recognized the broad shoulders and dark hair of Commander Cross. Raven turned as she approached, and she saw the same exhaustion in his face that she felt in her bones. They stood there for a moment, two enemies drawn together by forces neither understood. "You can't sleep either," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "The dreams," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have them too." He nodded, turning back to the stars. "I see things that never happened. Remember feelings that aren't mine?" He paused, his hands gripping the railing. "I see you." Velora moved to stand beside him, careful to maintain some distance. "I see you as well, but not as you are now. As someone else, someone She struggled with the words. "Someone I cared for. More than cared for," Raven said softly. "In the dreams, we're—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Lovers," she completed, the word hanging between them like a confession. They stood in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Gradually, Velora became aware of a strange sensation, like static electricity in the air. The feeling grew stronger the longer they stood near each other. "What's happening to us?" she asked. Before Raven could answer, the world around them dissolved. They were no longer on the station, but standing on a cliff overlooking a vast city. The architecture was neither human nor Valari, but something else, entirely organic curves that seemed to grow from the living rock. The sky above was a tapestry of purple and gold, and 3 moons hung in the heavens. "Thane," a voice said beside him, and Raven turned to see not Velora, but someone else. A woman with the same golden eyes, but younger, her silver hair unbound and flowing in the alien breeze. Her skin was the same beautiful purple, but unmarked by the ritual scars of a war captain. "Zevara," he heard himself say, though he had never learned that name. His voice was different, deeper, with an accent he didn't recognize. "A council of ancients has made their decision," she said, her face etched with sorrow. "Our peoples will be separated. The great experiment has failed." "No," Thane said, reaching for her. "We can still stop this. If we show them what we've found, what we've become together, they will not listen." Zevara interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "They say the bonding is unnatural, that it threatens the purity of both species. They would rather see us extinct than joined. And we'll leave," Thane said desperately. "Find somewhere they can't follow us, and abandon our people to their fate?" Zevara shook her head. "You know we cannot. Our duty is to each other," Thane said, pulling her into his arms. "The bond we share, it's not just love, it's evolution. It's the next step for both our kinds." Zevara melted into his embrace, her tears dampening the fabric of his robes. "I know, but knowing and being able to act are different things." The vision began to fade, but not before Raven felt the overwhelming love these two had shared, a connection that transcended physical existence. As the memory dissolved, he found himself back on the observation deck, but something had changed. Velora was closer now, her hand resting on the rail next to his. Where their fingers nearly touched, he could feel warmth, and something else, a connection that hummed with potential. "We were them," she said with certainty. "Somehow, we were them." "The psychic bond," Raven said, understanding flooding through him. "It's real. It's not just some legend." "My people have stories," Velora said slowly. "Ancient tales of a time when Valari and humans could share thoughts, emotions. But I thought they were myths. Maybe they were real, Raven said. Maybe we were real. Without conscious thought, their hands moved together, fingers intertwining. The moment their skin touched, the connection exploded into full awareness. They could feel each other's emotions, hear each other's thoughts as clearly as their own voices. This is impossible, Velora's mind whispered to his. But it's happening. He replied without speaking. The sensation was overwhelming, intimate beyond anything either had experienced. Through the link, Raven felt Velora's confusion, her fear, but also her growing wonder. She felt his amazement, his desperate hope that this was real. We should not be doing this, she said aloud, but she didn't pull away. Probably not, Raven agreed. But I don't think I can stop. They turned to face each other, and in that moment, the careful barriers they had built around their hearts crumbled. Velora saw past the uniform to the man beneath, honorable, brave, carrying the weight of his people's expectations. Raven saw past the war captain's mask to the woman who had been shaped by duty, but longed for something more. This is madness, Velora whispered as they moved closer together. Then we're both mad, Raven replied, his hand moving to cup her face. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, softer than he had expected. Her golden eyes searched his face, looking for some sign that this was real, that she wasn't dreaming. If we do this, she said, there will be no going back. They will call us traitors, both our peoples. Are you afraid? He asked. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I am War Captain Velora Nightbane. I fear nothing. Then neither do I, Raven said, and kissed her. The moment their lips met, the psychic bond flared to life completely. Every barrier between them fell away, and they were no longer two separate beings, but one consciousness split between two bodies. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate, as if they were trying to make up for lifetimes of separation. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Velora's carefully controlled composure was completely shattered, her golden eyes bright with unshed tears. I remember now, she whispered. I remember loving you. And I remember promising to find you again, Raven replied, his forehead resting against hers. They stood there in the starlight, holding each other as the true magnitude of their situation became clear. They were not just a human and a Valari who had found each other. They were the reincarnation of an ancient love story, a bond that had transcended death itself. But their reunion was taking place in the middle of a cold war between their species, and their love would be seen as the ultimate betrayal by both sides. What do we do now? Velora asked. We find a way, Raven said with conviction. We found each other across centuries and death itself. We can find a way to be together. As they stood there planning their impossible future, neither noticed the small surveillance drone that had been quietly recording their meeting from the shadows. The device transmitted its data to computers. On both sides of the station, where intelligence analysts were already beginning to piece together the implications of what they were seeing, the ancient bond had awakened, but they were not the only ones who would take notice. The alarms began screaming at 0600 hours. Raven jolted awake. As emergency lights bathed his quarters in pulsing red, his door chimed insistently, followed by urgent pounding. Commander Cross, open up immediately. He stumbled to the door, still, groggy from the few hours of sleep he'd managed after leaving the observation deck. Two military police officers stood in the corridor, their faces grim. Sir, you're to come with us. Director Hastings wants to see you immediately. The interrogation room was sterile white, containing only a metal table and 2 chairs. Director Hastings, head of Terran intelligence, sat across from him with a tablet displaying sensor readings that made Raven's blood run cold. Unusual psychic emanations, Hastings said without preamble, recorded between 023 and 0415 hours, originating from the observation deck. Care to explain what you were doing there, Commander? I couldn't sleep, Raven said carefully. I went to look at the stars, Alone? The question hung in the air like a trap. Raven met the director's gaze steadily. Yes, sir. Hastings tapped the tablet, and a video began playing. Raven's heart sank as he watched himself and Velora on the observation deck, their figures clearly visible despite the low lighting. The audio was poor, but their intimate conversation was unmistakable. That doesn't look like stargazing to me, Hastings said coldly. It looks like treason. Across the station, Velora knelt in the center of a circle of Valari officers, her wrists bound with neural restraints that sent jolts of pain through her nervous system whenever she moved. War Commander Kyrith, her superior, paced around her like a hunting cat. Explain to me, Kyrith said, her voice deceptively calm, how a warrior of your standing came to be compromised by human psychological warfare. I was not compromised, Velora said through gritted teeth. No? Kyrith gestured, and one of the officers activated a holographic display. The same surveillance footage played, showing Velora in Raven's arms. This suggests otherwise. The bond is real, Velora said, lifting her chin defiantly. It is ancient, older than the war between our peoples. Kyrith's laugh was like breaking glass. Ancient myths will not save you from a charge of treason, Captain. You have allowed the enemy to manipulate your mind. The only question is whether you did so willingly. I did nothing wrong, Velora insisted, but her words were cut short as Kyrith activated the neural restraints at full power. Pain exploded through her body, and she bit back a scream. Wrong answer, Kyrith said. In his cell, Raven felt Velora's agony through their psychic link. The sensation hit him like a physical blow, and he gasped, doubling over in his chair. What's wrong with him? One of the guards asked. Hastings leaned forward, studying Raven's reaction with interest. It's real, isn't it? The psychic connection. My God, the implications. You have to stop them, Raven gasped. They're torturing her. They're interrogating a potential security threat, Hastings corrected, just as we are. Through the bond, Raven felt Velora's determination, her refusal to betray their connection despite the pain. Her strength gave him clarity, and he began to plan. The station's power grid was old, its emergency protocols unchanged since construction. Raven had helped design the security systems during his engineering rotation years ago. He knew exactly where to strike. Using the psychic link, he reached out to Velora's mind. Can you break your restraints? Her mental voice was strained but determined. If you can create a distraction, trust me, he sent back, and began to convulsively, as if having a seizure. Medical emergency. Hastings shouted as Raven collapsed, his body twitching. Get a medic in here now. In the confusion that followed, no one noticed the small device Raven palmed from his belt and activated. The electromagnetic pulse was tiny, barely enough to affect local systems, but it was precisely targeted. Every light in Section C went out. In the darkness, Velora moved. The neural restraints, designed to prevent escape through brute force, were vulnerable to their own feedback when their power regulators failed. She channeled the residual energy back through the system, overloading the circuits. The restraints exploded in showers of sparks, and she rolled away from her captor's grasping hands. Emergency lighting flickered on just as she reached the weapons locker. Her armor's combat systems were still active, and she used them to override the magnetic locks. A plasma rifle materialized in her hands. Stand down, Kyrith shouted, but Velora was already moving. She fought her way through the Valari security. Team with devastating efficiency, her warrior training taking over. But she didn't kill, couldn't bring herself to murder her own people, no matter how they had betrayed her. Meanwhile, Raven had recovered from his seizure and overpowered the distracted guards. He retrieved his sidearm and fought his way toward the docking bay. Following the mental map Velora was sending him through their link, they met at the central hub, both breathing hard and streaked with the evidence of their escapes. Around them, alarms wailed as security forces from both species converged on their position. "This way," Raven said, grabbing Velora's hand. Together, they ran toward the civilian section of the station. "There!" Velora pointed to a maintenance shuttle docked at an emergency port. "Can you pilot that?" "Can you?" "Better than you can," she said with a fierce grin. They reached the shuttle just as the first security teams arrived. Plasma bolts and energy beams lit up the docking bay as they dove through the shuttle's airlock. Velora's fingers flew over the alien controls, her military training adapting quickly to the civilian craft's systems. "Hold on," she warned, and hit the emergency release dot. The shuttle shot out of the bay like a cork from a bottle, tumbling into space as Velora fought to stabilize their flight. Behind them, the station launched pursuit craft, both human and Velari ships, working together for the first time in centuries, united in their desire to recapture the fugitives. "Where can we go?" Raven asked as he strapped himself into the co-pilot's seat. "The Kalos asteroid field," Velora said, her hands steady on the controls despite the chaos around them. "There are abandoned mining facilities there. We can hide while we figure out what to do. Why are you helping me?" Raven asked as they dove into the asteroid field, their pursuers falling behind as they navigated the dangerous maze of tumbling rock. Velora looked at him, her golden eyes bright with something he was beginning to recognize as love. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not just a weapon. I'm a woman who has found her other half." They found refuge in an old mining station, its life support barely functional, but adequate for their needs. As Velora sealed the airlocks, behind them, the isolation hit them both. They were now fugitives from both their peoples, with nowhere to go and no one to trust except each other. "We can't go back," Raven said quietly. "I know," Velora replied, "but I don't regret it." They stood facing each other in the dim light of the abandoned facility, and the full weight of what they had done and what they meant to each other settled between them. They had given up everything for this moment, this chance to be together. "I love you," Raven said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it's impossible. I know we've only just met, but Velora silenced him with a kiss, fierce and desperate. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you for lifetimes." This time, when they came together, there was no hesitation. Their hands moved with urgent need, stripping away not just clothing, but the barriers of species, duty, and fear. Velora's purple skin was silk beneath his fingers, and every touch sent electric sensations through their psychic bond. They made love with the passion of souls reunited, their bodies moving together as naturally as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Through their connection, each felt what the other experienced, doubling every sensation, every moment of pleasure. Afterward, they lay entwined on the narrow bunk, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Velora traced patterns on Raven's chest with her finger, her touch gentle and wondering. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we find a way to convince our peoples that love is stronger than hate," Raven said, pulling her closer. "We find proof that the bond between us is real, that it represents hope for both our species. And if we fail, then we fail together," he said, kissing the top of her head. "But I don't think we will. What we have, it's bigger than politics or war. It's destiny." As they held each other in the darkness of space, both knew that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time since the ancient war began, there was hope that love might find a way to heal the wounds between their peoples. 3 weeks after their escape, Raven and Velora stood before the ancient gates of Ashkalan, the legendary first colony that both species claimed in their histories. The journey had been perilous, dodging patrol ships and living on emergency rations, but their psychic bond had grown stronger with each passing day. They could now communicate across vast distances, share not just thoughts, but memories and emotions. The archives should be in the central spire, Velora said, studying the massive crystalline structures that rose from the planet's surface like frozen music. If the old stories are true. Stories our people tell very differently, Raven observed, checking his scanner for signs of life. The readings were negative. They were alone on this dead world. The gates opened at their approach, responding to some ancient sensor that recognized their combined presence. As they walked through corridors untouched for millennia, holographic recordings flickered to life around them, showing glimpses of the civilization that had once thrived here. Look, Velora breathed, pointing to a recording of figures working. Together humans and Velari, side by side, their hands joined in some kind of ceremony. The bonding ritual, Raven said, the knowledge coming to him unbidden. They weren't just allies, they were connected, like us. The central archive was a vast chamber filled with crystalline data cores, their surfaces pulsing with stored information. As they approached the main terminal, it activated automatically, projecting a three-dimensional map of the galaxy as it had been centuries ago. "Welcome, Fane and Zevara," a voice said in the ancient tongue, though somehow they both understood it perfectly. "We have been waiting for your return." The hologram that materialized was neither fully human nor Velari, but something between a being that embodied the best of both species. Its eyes held the wisdom of ages and the sadness of great loss. "I am the keeper of memory," it said, "the last guardian of the truth that both your peoples have forgotten in their hatred." "What truth?" Velora asked, though part of her already knew. "That you were never separate species," the keeper replied. "You were one people, split apart by a cosmic catastrophe that severed the psychic bonds linking your minds. The Great War, your histories speak of, was not a conflict between enemies. It was a desperate attempt to survive the psychic rupture that nearly destroyed you all. The archive chamber filled with visions of the past, not the sanitized histories both species taught their children, but the raw truth of what had happened." Raven and Velora watched in horrified fascination as they witnessed their ancestors. Agony as the psychic network that had connected their entire civilization suddenly collapsed. The trauma was so great that both fragments of your people blocked the memories, creating false histories to explain the pain, the keeper continued. Over time, the lies became truth, and truth became myth. But the bonds remained, dormant in a few bloodlines, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. "The betrayal," Raven said, understanding flooding through him. "The story of how the Valeri attacked the human colonies, it never happened, did it?" "No more than the human tale of unprovoked aggression," the keeper confirmed. "Both accounts described the same event, the desperate evacuation as your people tried to save themselves from the psychic collapse. The enemy ships were rescue vessels. The attacks were emergency medical procedures. But the trauma twisted the memories, made salvation look like betrayal." Velora sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the revelation. All those deaths, all that hatred, all for nothing. "Not for nothing," the keeper said gently. "The separation was necessary. Your people needed time to heal, to grow strong enough to rejoin without being destroyed by the intensity of the full bond. You and your mate are the first sign that the healing is complete." "But how do we convince them?" Raven asked. "How do we make them believe? Show them what you have seen. Share the bond that runs between you. Those who are ready will feel the truth in their hearts." The keeper began to fade, its purpose fulfilled. "The choice is yours, as it always has been. You can hide from the truth and live in exile, or you can embrace your destiny and heal the wound that has divided your people for centuries." As the hologram disappeared, warning alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Raven's scanner showed multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, a joint human Valari fleet that had finally tracked them down. "They found us," Valora said, checking her weapons. "No," Raven said, a new determination filling his voice. "We found what we needed. Now it's time to go home." They transmitted the archive data to the approaching fleet, broadcasting the truth on all frequencies. But their message was met with weapons fire from both sides clearly. Neither government was ready to accept evidence that would undermine centuries of propaganda. "The command ship," Valora said, identifying the massive Valari dreadnought leading the formation. "If we can get aboard, they'll shoot us down the moment we launch," Raven interrupted. "Not if we surrender." They were captured within hours, separated and held in different ships as the fleet prepared to return to civilized space. But their captors had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated the strength of the psychic bond between them. That night, as the fleet traveled through hyperspace, Raven felt Velora's presence in his mind more clearly than ever before. She was being held in the detention center of the Valari flagship, her wrists bound with neural restraints that should have blocked their connection. "Can you hear me?" Her mental voice whispered, "Always," he replied. "Are you hurt?" "They questioned me for hours. Kyrith believes I'd been brainwashed by human technology." He felt her bitter amusement. "If only she knew how much more complex the truth is, that we have to find a way to escape," Raven sent. "To get the truth to people who will listen. There is a way." Valora replied, and he felt her forming a desperate plan. "But it will require both of us. And the risk, tell me." What she proposed was madness, a psychic broadcast that would use their bond as a transmission array, sending the truth directly into the minds of everyone in the fleet. But the power required would likely kill them both. "I'm willing," Raven said without hesitation. "And I love you for it," she replied. "But there may be another way. If we can synchronize our escape attempts, create enough chaos to reach the command center." Their plan required perfect timing. Raven would overload the power grid on his ship while Valora broke free from her restraints. In the confusion, they would fight their way to the fleet's central communication array and broadcast the archive data before anyone could stop them. It worked better than they had dared hope. Raven's electromagnetic pulse disabled half the systems on the human cruiser, while Valora's escape created panic among the Valari crew. They fought through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting, their shared consciousness allowing them to coordinate their movements perfectly. They reached the communication center, just as security forces from both ships converged on their position. As weapons fire filled the air around them, Raven and Valora worked together at the massive console, uploading the archive data and preparing to broadcast it across the entire fleet. "Stop!" Director Hastings burst into the chamber, his sidearm trained on Raven. "You're committing an act of war." "No," Raven said, his finger hovering over the transmission key. "I'm committing an act of peace." A Valari energy beam caught Valora in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the wall. Raven felt her pain as if it were his own, and rage filled him like nothing he had ever experienced. "Valora!" He abandoned the console and caught her as she fell, pressing his hands against the wound to stop the bleeding. "The transmission," she gasped. "You have to—" "I'm not leaving you," he said fiercely. She smiled, her golden eyes bright with love and determination. "Then we do it together." They crawled back to the console, their hands intertwining over the activation key. Around them, security forces hesitated, unsure whether to fire on their own officers. "For our people," Valora whispered. "For our future," Raven agreed. Together, they activated the transmission. The archive data flooded through the communication networks of both fleets, carrying with it not just information, but the psychic resonance of truth. Every person who received it felt the authenticity in their bones, the rightness of the revelation. On the human ships, Officers who had spent their careers fighting the Valari suddenly remembered dreams of purple skies and golden eyes. On the Valari vessels, warriors who had known only battle felt stirrings of connection, of bonds that transcended species. The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Raven held Velora against his chest, her blood seeping through his fingers. "Did we do it?" she asked weakly. "Look," he said, nodding toward the viewports. Outside, the ships of both fleets had stopped firing. Instead, they hung in space together, their crews struggling to process the magnitude of what they had learned. "The truth is out there now," Raven said, kissing Velora's forehead. "Now we just have to survive, long enough to see what they do with it." As medical teams rushed to treat Velora's wounds, Raven felt a change in the psychic atmosphere around them. The revelation had awakened something in the fleet, not just understanding, but hope that the war between their peoples wasn't over yet. But for the first time in centuries, peace seemed possible. Part 5. Love conquers all 6 months after the transmission that shook both empires. Raven stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching ships from both fleets work together to build something unprecedented, a joint colony where humans and Valari could live as one people. The road to this moment had been anything but smooth. The initial response to the archived revelations had split both species down the middle. Progressive factions embraced the truth and called for reunification, while hardliners denounced it as elaborate enemy propaganda. The Cold War had briefly threatened to become hot again as extremists on both sides attempted to silence the growing peace movement, but the psychic awakening had been unstoppable. Once the first bonds reactivated, others followed. Humans and Valari across both empires began experiencing shared dreams, phantom memories, and inexplicable attractions to members of the other species. The governments tried to suppress these reports, but the evidence was overwhelming. "The morning briefing is in 10 minutes, Velora said, joining him at the viewport. Her shoulder still bore the scar from their desperate escape, but she moved with her old fluid grace. The neural damage from the energy weapon had taken months to heal, during which Raven had rarely left her side. "Any word from the Council of Elders?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "They're still debating," she said with a slight smile. 300-year-old Valeri do not change their minds quickly, but the younger generation grows more restless every day. Below them, the construction continued. Human and Valari engineers worked side by side, their different approaches to technology creating innovations neither species could have achieved alone. The sight filled Raven with hope, but also with urgency. They were running out of time. The extremists had not been idle. A terrorist organization calling itself the Pure Blood Alliance had formed, drawing members from both species who viewed the reunification as racial contamination. Their attacks had been escalating, and intelligence suggested they were planning something catastrophic. "Sir." Lieutenant Torres burst onto the observation deck, his face flushed with urgency. "Long-range sensors are detecting a massive fleet approaching the system. Mixed human and Valari signatures, but they're not responding to hails." Raven and Velora exchanged grim looks. The Pure Blood Alliance had finally made their move. An hour later, they stood in the Joint Command Center, watching the tactical display. With growing dread, nearly 100 ships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system-stolen vessels from both fleets, now flying under the banner of racial purity. "They mean to destroy the colony," Admiral Chun said, the human fleet commander who had become an unlikely ally after experiencing his own psychic awakening. "Make it look like an unprovoked attack by the other side." "The perfect way to restart the war," agreed War Commander Kyrith. Velora's former superior had fought the hardest against accepting the truth, but she had finally been swayed by the undeniable evidence of her own dormant bonds. "How long before they reach us?" Raven asked. 6 hours, Torres reported. Our combined fleets here can't match their firepower. Then we evacuate, Admiral Chun said. Save as many lives as we can. No, Velora said firmly. If we run, they win. The colony dies, and with it, any hope of reunification. What do you suggest? Kyrith asked, that we fight a battle we cannot win? Velora looked at Raven, and he saw the same desperate idea forming. In her mind, it was taking shape in his. It was insane, potentially suicidal, but it might be their only chance. The psychic bond, Raven said slowly. What if we could extend it? Connect everyone in the system who has awakened. Create a network, Velora continued, understanding his thought. Pool our consciousness, our emotions. Show the attackers what? They're really fighting. Is such a thing possible? Admiral Chun asked. The archives mentioned it, Raven said. In the old civilization, before the collapse, they had a collective consciousness that spanned entire star systems. If we could recreate even a fraction of that ... It would require willing participants from both species, Kyrith said thoughtfully. And the risk to the focal points, to you too, would be enormous. We're willing to take that risk, Raven said without hesitation. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Word spread through both fleets about the plan, and volunteers came forward, humans and Valari, who had experienced the awakening and were willing to link their minds in a desperate gamble for peace. As the enemy fleet drew closer, Raven and Velora positioned themselves in the station's central chamber, surrounded by volunteers from both species. The diversity was striking. Young officers barely out of the academy, standing beside grizzled veterans, scientists and engineers who had worked together on the colony project. Remember, Velora said as they began the linking process, we're not trying to control them. We're showing them the truth. Let them feel what we feel. The psychic network formed slowly, mind linking to mind in an ever-expanding web of consciousness. Raven felt the unique perspective of each participant. Admiral Chun's wonder at discovering his Valari soul bond. Kyrith's struggle to overcome. A lifetime of conditioning. Torres's simple faith that love could conquer hate. As the network stabilized, Velora took Raven's hand, and their combined consciousness became the focal point for the entire system. Through their bond, hundreds of minds touched, sharing memories, emotions, and the undeniable truth of their common heritage. The enemy fleet arrived just as the network reached full strength. Attention Unity Station, came the transmission from the lead ship. You have 30 minutes to surrender the collaborators and traitors. After that, we will cleanse this system of contamination. Instead of responding with words, Raven and Velora opened the psychic network to broadcast range. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Every person in the attacking fleet suddenly experienced the full weight of the collective consciousness, not as an invasion, but as a gentle embrace. They felt the love between Raven and Velora, the hope of the colony builders, the joy of rediscovered connections. Most importantly, they felt the truth. On the bridge of the lead attack ship, Captain Morrison, a human hardliner who had stolen. The vessel from Earth fleet staggered as alien emotions flooded his mind. But these weren't truly alien emotions, he realized with growing wonder. They were his own feelings, buried under years of propaganda and hate. Beside him, Sub-Commander Telex, a Valari extremist, dropped her weapon as memories that weren't quite memories filled her consciousness. She saw herself as a child, playing with human friends in dreams she had dismissed as fantasy. She felt the phantom ache of bonds severed before they could fully form. Throughout the fleet, similar scenes played out. Weapons powered down as their operators wept with sudden understanding. The racial hatred that had driven them to this point crumbled in the face of psychic truth that could not be denied or explained away. I remember, Captain Morrison whispered, tears streaming down his face. We were never enemies. We were family. But not everyone was ready to accept the revelation. On 3 of the attacking ships, the most fanatical extremists fought against the psychic connection, using neural dampeners and isolation chambers to shield themselves from the truth. "They're still coming," Torres reported from the tactical station. 3 ships, all weapons hot. Raven felt the strain of maintaining the network beginning to tell on both him and Velora. Their bodies were never meant to channel this much psychic energy, and he could feel their life forces being consumed by the effort. "We have to stop them," Velora's mind whispered to his, her mental voice growing weak. "Together," he replied, pouring the last of his strength into the connection. They reached out through the network, not to the ships themselves, but to the isolated extremists aboard them. These minds were harder to reach, protected by technology and fanaticism, but love was stronger than fear. One by one, the barriers fell. The extremists felt the full weight of what they were about to destroy, not just a colony, but the future of both species. Their weapons powered down, their ships drifting to a stop as their crews struggled to process the magnitude of their revelation. The psychic network collapsed as Raven and Velora's strength finally gave out. They fell to their knees in the center of the chamber, their bodies drained, but their spirits soaring. "Did we do it?" Velora asked weakly. Raven looked at the tactical display, where hundreds of ships now hung motionless in space, no longer an attacking fleet, but a gathering of souls finally awakened to their true nature. "We did it," he said, helping her to her feet. The integration process took months, but it was a time of wonder and discovery. Humans and Velari worked together to rebuild not just the colony, but their entire understanding of what it meant to be alive and conscious in the universe. Raven and Velora found themselves at the center of it all, their love story becoming the foundation myth of the new civilization. They were no longer just individuals, but symbols of what their peoples could become together. A year later, they stood in the same chamber where they had saved 2 civilizations, but now it was decorated for a wedding. Representatives from both species filled the space, all of them connected by the growing psychic network that linked the colony.